Thank you all so much. I'm gonna go ahead and make this big play. Hey, so just a couple logistics to help us this evening. Let me start here. Here we go. You've all joined the meeting on mute. And so we're gonna keep you all on mute to help facilitate the conversation. If you have any questions, hold on one second. Oh gosh, hold on one second. My screen seems to be frozen. Do you want to take over, Jorge, really quickly as I figure out what's going on my end?
Sure. So far we've got, I see that there are 53 participants that have logged on. There are 272. So people will be popping online. And those of you that are currently online, before I get started on the formal program, I'd like to know what you folks know about the Zoot riots. And in the chat comments, I want to know, do you know a little? Do you know a lot? And then where did you learn that from? Did you learn that from a TV program, self-study? Were you lucky enough to have had a Chicano studies class? Kind of generally where you learned from, so that way we can get an idea of the level of knowledge that we are dealing with as it relates to this group. And Drew, since it's frozen, just go ahead and take it off.
All right, I got it.
There you go. Go for it.
All right. So you joined the meeting on mute. You can go ahead and update your name over participant on the right-hand side if you'd like to update your name. We're going to use the chat feature to share questions and comments if you have any questions. And you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view to choose who's visible. We recommend speaker view so you can see the presenters. Or to make the experience even better, to see just the speakers, you can select the Stop Video tab, which is down at the bottom in the left-hand corner, and then click Video Settings. And from Video Settings, click Hide Non-Video Participants. This way, you just see Jorge and Carlos. So thank you so much.
All right, gente. So again, I want to thank you folks for joining us for this Zoom chat, and also thank Dr. Carlos Cortés, who has been retired now for over 20 years from UC Riverside, but who cannot seem to really retire. And that always serves to our benefit, because whenever we ask Dr. Carlos Cortés to participate, he is just readily available. Ever since I met him in my first year of college, being involved in Mecha and Teatro and all these different groups, whenever we ask Carlos for any assistance, any help, any participation, he has never, ever said no. So we're just lucky to have Carlos. So Carlos, thank you so much for agreeing to participate. And I want to give a kind of a brief historical overview. The fact pattern and the dates are not important, except to understand where the Zoot riots fall in a historical timeline. So as it relates to Raza, as it relates to Chicanos, 1846, there was the war of aggression against Mexico in a land grab, I should say. So the war ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In 1850, gold was found in California. Even though there was a large population of Californios and Angelinos, and prior to 1850, they controlled the major political offices. By 1852, whatever political power they had dissipated just by becoming a numerical minority. In 1910, the populace of Mexico rebelled against the government of Mexico. Reputedly, there were 8 families that had controlled the wealth of Mexico. And along with those 8 families were major U.S. interests in mining and ore and minerals that also helped prop up the government. In 1921, the Mexican Revolution ended. During the time period between 1910 and 1921, 1/8 of Mexico's population came to the U.S. World War II started in 1939 and lasted until 1946. Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. The Japanese, by executive order, were placed in concentration camps or internment camps. I see no difference. On February 19th of 1942. In 1941, Hearst newspaper started running articles and headlines about a reputed crime wave that existed in Los Angeles and the neighboring areas. The Sleepy Lagoon murder took place on August 1st of 1942, ended in 1943. The riots were June 3rd through 9th, 1943. I asked a comment about people where they learned about Chicano studies. Let's see, Marisa Yeager learned it at UC Santa Barbara. Sonia Gonzalez Metalac learned it at Cal State San Bernardino. Let's see, Ninfa Delgado, Chicano Studies, UC Riverside.
Jorge?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's surprising, but not surprising to see how many of the people learned about it through a Chicano studies class.
Right.
And that speaks to the issue that when we talk about the Zoot riots tonight, I hope that you at your local community see to it that when the new ethnic studies gets in as a statewide requirement, that you make certain the Zoot riots are part of your local curriculum. This is where the pressure has to be. And so I think it's really critical reading these comments.
See, I was lucky. I went to North High School in 10th grade, and North had Mexican-American studies with Richard Munguia. So as an 11th grader, I was able to take Chicano studies, and it gave me a sense of self, a sense of placement in history. And it kind of, all those negative things that we have ever heard, especially when they say, wetback, go home. And the response is, well, I am home. Not only historically in my home, but as a fifth generation Chicano, I am home. So where do I go back to if historically we are on occupied Mexican land? So it really gave me the ammunition to be able to fight the negativity that was just inflicted on us just from day one, from the moment you enroll in school till you go out. You have just that negativity where they tell you you're not smart enough, bright enough, cute enough, blonde enough, blue-eyed enough, to be able to make it in society. So Chicano studies, I think, is super important. The fact that the governor just signed it so that Cal States must teach it as a requirement, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then some of these folks learned it from you, Dr. Carlos Cortés.
Yeah.
So you have been a source of a lot of information for a lot of us for many years.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something else. As I read them, there seem to be three kinds of places they learn it. One from, if they're fortunate enough to have a Chicano studies class. The second is how many saw Zoot and been inspired by seeing Zoot. And then there are a few who wrote down they heard it from their folks, which I find kind of interesting. It means that enough family memory has been retained to pass it down.
I think all of these folks either learned it directly from family and friends or from Chicano studies. So going to tonight's topic, I wanted to start with just Zoot riots and how that may or may not be accurate, and wanted you to talk about why it's a misnomer or a mischaracterization to call it a riot.
Well, I think we can call it a riot, but it wasn't the Zoot Suiters who were the rioters. It was the Navy, and in particular, who were the rioters. They're the one, and except when you stick the title Zoot Suit and riots, suddenly they're the rioters. I mean, if you say the Jewish Holocaust, you would have the sense that the Jews are actually committing the Holocaust. When it's the Nazi Holocaust, this is the same thing we have here. We have Zoot Suit riots, which sort of implies that they're the ones doing the rioting, when in fact it was the servicemen were doing it. So we've been stuck with that misnomer from the very beginning.
And not only that, when you look at the sociological or cultural anthropological definition of riot, It's the aggrieved party fighting against an authority figure, right? And that there's destruction of either private or public property. Well, it wasn't the aggrieved party, you know, Mexicanos or Zoot suitors or Pachucos. It was actually this creation of a so-called crime wave and painting people who dressed a certain way as thugs, as criminals. So it wasn't the aggrieved party. And I can't say that the sailors were the aggrieved party.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
No. So we've been calling them riots all these years, and they're not. They should actually be called the servicemen riots.
Oh, yeah, absolutely the servicemen's riot. Yeah.
Right. And what role do you think the Mexican Revolution, well, take it back. The war between U.S. and Mexico and the expulsion of U.S. interests from Mexico during that time period, and then also what happened between 1910 and 1921, how much do you think that those two historical events played in the anti-Mexican sentiment that existed in Los Angeles in the 1940s?
Oh, I think a tremendous amount. I remember Mexicans were the other. I mean, there were two others in the westward expansion of the U.S., Native Americans and Mexicans. And in fact, it was only by the conquest of Mexican territory that California is part of the United States now. So we were always the other. I say we because you're a fifth generation. I'm only second generation in the United States. My dad came from Mexico. But the fact that we were othered from the very, very beginning, and the Zoot suitors were in the 1940s, it's over nearly 100 years that otherness was playing a role, not only in the eyes of community people, but as we talked about, in the media who treated this otherness, and that we were othered in the very headlines of the stories that appeared.
I learned something in preparing for this. William Randolph Hearst really had some deep-rooted, deep-seated anti-Mexican history. And there's a big gigantic article that just laid out, you know, the hatred that he had. He tried to create and instigate a war between the United States and Mexico in 1916. The newspaper ran a big headline that says, "The war has begun." And in the body of that article, it talks about how ships and sailors were on their way to Mexico for the complete pacification and annexation of that country. So he made it sound like the US was on its way to conquer Mexico in order to instigate a war between US and Mexico. I had not known that previously. So his hatred, dislike of Mexico and Mexicans existed during the period between 1910 and 1921, because that article was 1960.
Remember, he stirred up the invasion of Cuba in 1898. So this idea of Latino lands ought to belong to us. In fact, that's how Puerto Rico became part of the United States.
So, and he controlled 16 major newspapers. Yep. From the East Coast to the West Coast. He controlled 16 major, because looking at the headlines, I was wondering, why is it that a newspaper in Washington ran, the headlines about the Zoot suitors, and a New York newspaper ran the headlines about that? And you figured out it was because one person controlled that entire media outlet, and they controlled the content of that, and they controlled what direction those articles, how to direct people and how to feel.
And by the way, that's an increasing problem today, as locally owned newspapers are disappearing and becoming part of change, that one person like that can dictate what people throughout the country are going to learn from their local papers. They think it's local news, but it's independent news, but it's not.
Yeah. I don't believe there's any such thing as local news anymore. I think
No,
you've got the major networks,
disappeared.
and each
You
one
know,
has their views.
You know, one of the things in looking over the articles on Zoot Suiters, they struck me is that servicemen would go into restaurants, into movie theaters, and get Mexicans and beat them up. But the point is, how did they know? What they were doing was looking for people who looked a certain way. I mean, let's take you and me, Jorge. I'm of mixed background. I mean, my dad's a Mexican immigrant. My mother is Austro-Ukrainian. I came up looking this way. I didn't choose it, obviously. And so if these servicemen went into one of these theaters and you were sitting there and I was sitting there, they'd be grabbing you because you're because of the tint of your skin, and so it was not just anti-Mexican, it was anti-people who look different than we want them to look.
Right. And you know, I think I'm trying to share a screenshot of a newspaper. And it says Zoot Suit War called near anarchy.
It came up on my screen.
Yeah, and look at the servicemen. You know, they all have these, you know, sticks. There you see sailors, you see Marines, you see Army, you see all branches of the military that were out for blood, so to speak. And the funny thing is that the Zoot suit wasn't a Chicano creation. You know, I say that every Pachuco could be a Zoot suiter, but not every Zoot suiter could be a Pachuco. Because when the Zoot suit was created in 1939 by Harold Fox and a bunch of other fashionistas during that time period, Harlem became the focal point of the use of the Zoot suit. And then you saw Danny Kaye wearing a Zoot suit. Then you saw Dean Martin wearing a Zoot suit. And you saw
especially Frank Sinatra.
And Frank Sinatra.
He had the skinny little shoulders, and so he had this huge thing that set him off. Yeah.
So everyone was wearing a Zoot suit during that time period. And so the Chicanos, the youngsters, their older brothers are fighting in the war. These are the young men that stayed. They wanted to be in fashion. They wanted to be the Frank Sinatras and the Danny Kays and the Cab Callaways and all those different people. But somehow the idea of Pachucos and Zoot suiter just became synonymous with each other with a very negative slant.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You know, growing up in Kansas City, Missouri, we knew about Zoot suits, but it was all an East Coast thing to us. We didn't learn about West Coast Zoot suiting. We learned about the Zoot suiting you've been talking about. Particularly Italian Americans who were following the mode sent by Frank Sinatra.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, so Zoot suit riots, that's a misnomer. How about the fact that the sailors and the OWI, the Office of Something Intelligence, Warfare Intelligence, their first response to that is that the Navy men were acting in self-defense.
Yeah. Well, they were trying to stem the tide. Remember, this is a time they're trying to build up support for the war effort, trying to get people to enlist. So they've got to put the best flavor, the best prism over the top of what the servicemen are doing. I mean, the irony, of course, is that lots of Chicanos were joining the military at that time.
We had joined in World War II. We probably had joined in just large numbers. And here's the other thing. So they try to paint it as a war. They try to paint it as the servicemen were acting in self-defense. But look at who they were beating up. Let me put this on the screen. Look at who they were beating up. That guy looks to be about 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And there's two of them. So these were the younger brothers of the men who went off to war. So those who were 17, 18, 19 were signing up to go fight in World War II, and their brothers who were 13, 14, 15, 16 remained at home, but they were the ones that were being beat. And the other thing is, people, say, well, it was just the boys that were beat up. But let me see if I could pull up one on showing how women were also the victim of being jailed. And I'll show you see if I can do an image here of a lone woman in a cell in the Los Angeles County Jail. And then I'm going to show you an image of a bunch of women being rounded up in a bus. So there's the lone woman, she's in a cell. And then here is the image of, it only allows you to do one image at a time.
No.
This is a very interesting time when we can't do a slide presentation, we can't meet live, but that we have to learn how to use technology in a fashion that we have never learned it before. And, where is there a 12-year-old when you need one? See, so women were also being rounded up and arrested. So it wasn't just the young brothers of the servicemen. It was also the sisters of the servicemen. Everyone was treated with disdain. Everyone was treated as if they were an enemy of the state. And there's even newspaper articles that talk about a roundup of 300 Zoot suit clad youth and how they were all jailed in Los Angeles. It was a sweep from one end of town to the other, and that they arrested 300 youngsters, and how, the newspaper just went to town on how finally the servicemen are cleaning up this problem.
Yeah, if they were sending a message, they weren't just, trying to hold down crime they were sending a message. We got our eyes on your community. You step out of line. You don't even have to step out of line. We're going to be there anyway.
And not only did the newspapers, talk about or try to portray Chicanos in a negative view, those people who wrote for the newspaper or who did cartoons for the newspaper also did that. And, there was there was the fear of Japanese. They were the fear of the Germans. They were the fear of the Sinarquistas, which was supposedly this small rebel group in Mexico that was supposed to be on the side of Germany. So they tried to paint Chicanos as German sympathizers. So look at this cartoon.
Yeah.
You've got obviously the Nazi Hitler mustache. You've got the swastika on the tie, and you've got them all wearing Zoot suits. So making the wearing of Zoot suit synonymous with fifth column, synonymous with German sympathizers, synonymous with enemies of the state.
Well, if you build the distrust of the other and you fall into the other, then the whole community catches it for that. And this is one of those perfect examples. And it gets exacerbated in wartime. And I want to add something else. You've got these young service people, especially servicemen, who were away from their families and clustered together. And boy, you can get the rumors going in a situation like that. And suddenly you've been locked up. You're not being sent out against the overseas enemy. You're sitting and locked up in Los Angeles, and suddenly all this buildup of it's time to fight. It's time to fight. Who do you fight? You fight the enemy at home, and there they were, and they were distinguished by the color of their skin.
and the mode of dress.
Nice and easy. See, skin tone just helps so much in being able to detect an enemy.
Because it's the visible other.
The way the Germans were treated German Americans were treated than Japanese Americans.
Right.
Some German Americans, in fact, were arrested, but you didn't have the wholesale roundup like you had Japanese Americans.
Because a German could blend in.
Sure.
A Japanese can't. Mexican can't blend in, right? Because
unless you end up looking like me, yeah. But I but this is with a skin tone thing,
right?
And that sort of thing still goes on. You know, I love it when I pick up. Well, you're a judge, you understand these things. When you hear a report, read a newspaper story, a report of the police saying we're looking for a criminal, male Hispanic. Now I say to myself, what the hell does that person look like? Because male Hispanic has nothing to do with what driver's license they're carrying. They haven't stopped, they haven't got a hold of a person. No one commits a crime, stops the person they committed the crime with, holds up the license, say, by the way, when you identify Hispanic. Male Hispanic means male darker tone.
Right.
So in a sense, it's even police calls today are invitations to stereotype.
Well, they're taught on stereotypes. They have an image of who a criminal is, and in today's day and age, it's the baggy clothes, the bald head, and the tattoos, right? Back in the 50s, it was the oversized clothing and the long hair.
Yeah.
So each time group had its characteristics of who the undesirables are. What they had in common was skin tone, whether it's
absolutely
darker skin tone Mexican or black African Americans, right? It's always, or an identifiable characteristic that's different, the Asian eyes and those kinds of things. And I think what exacerbated all these servicemen being in LA and seeing, Chicanos and Pachucos as the enemy is most of these youngsters were not from the two major cities where they intermingled or interacted with black and brown folk, right? These were the people in between who had never seen a Mexican, who had never had any interaction with the Mexican. So it was for them, it was easy to identify the Mexican as the other and
very easy. In fact, difficult not to when you're not raised around it. It's suddenly, these are aliens to them. And so you've got a lot of these servicemen stationed in LA who came from that kind of a background.
I read Mason's book on the Zoot and the psychology. And what I learned there is that the U.S. Naval had an imaginary fight against an imaginary aerial enemy, and that for 2 hours they were shooting, cannons up in the air, fighting this imaginary group of people in planes that were attacking Los Angeles.
Oh yeah, no. And once you stir up the emotions, they're going to come out somewhere. And Chicanos were just a nice, viable, identifiable, near target.
So Hearst newspaper set the tone, created a crime wave. Mexico complained. Why are you talking about a Mexican crime wave when we are a support of the U.S. and we're part of the Axis? So then at some point, the headline... Go ahead. At some point, the headlines went from Mexican crime wave to Pachuco crime wave. And so then, it not only first set the stage for dark-colored Mexicans, but then it set the stage for those people who wore a very definite style of clothing. So when the servicemen went out looking for people, they dragged everybody out of theaters who were either Mexican or who wore a Zoot suit. I see that Carlos's screen has frozen. So while we're waiting for it to unfreeze, I want to share a couple of other images that I was able to put together. So let's see about doing that. In terms of the headlines, so there was a call by the newspaper to have the police clean up, you know, the hoodlums. So it says police must clean up LA hoodlumism, but in here they pick out the group of who they consider to be hoodlums. It says riotous disturbance of the past week in Los Angeles by Zoot hoodlums have inflicted a deep and humiliating wound on the reputation of the city. So now the reputation of the city is you know at risk of being damaged. So there's a call for police to act on that. So when you saw these images of these youngsters who were beat up, and these youngsters who were laying, you know, bleeding in the street, the police officers would arrest the young Zoot shooters. The police officers would not arrest any of the sailors. So it was very, it would have been interesting to see how many sailors were or were not arrested as a result of the actions by the sailors. Now, so Carlos, are you back?
I'm back.
There you go. So I was sharing some images and talking about how the pressure was put on by the police, by these headlines, to clean up the Zoot shooters, to clean up this crime wave. So the Hearst newspaper set the tone for Mexican. And then when Mexico City complained, it changed the headlines to Pachuco. And then the headlines were putting pressure on the police to clean up this, you know, these thugs and these hoodlums. And I was remarking that whenever these youngsters were beat up and dragged in the middle of the street and stripped of their clothing, they often got arrested as a result of that. And none of the sailors ever got arrested.
Oh no, well, you know, the United States was walking a thin line here because this was the time of the good neighbor policy. So Mexico was a military ally. So the United States government is trying to placate Mexico on the one hand and not doing it very successfully. And Disney, remember, is making movies about good neighbors. Saludos amigos. They're doing Caballeros. They're doing this sort of what they say, animation good neighbor policy, but at the same time mistreating the kids on the streets of LA. And this is sort of the irony that's taking place while saluting our wonderful good neighbors to the south, but at the same time beating the hell out of the kids.
So when we look at how Chicanos are treated by police department and the justice system, I think that we can draw a correlation and a direct line between what happened in the 1940s and what happens today. For example, you know, the Pachucos had long hair. So whenever a youngster would go in front of a judge would order haircuts. So here's a justice of the peace saying, yep, they're okay now. Justice of the Peace, E.P. Wood of Montebello, passes on Adolf Vargas left and Valentin Valdez, erstwhile Zoot shooters, whom the court divested of robes and hairdo. So they had a definite image of what an American should look like, and it wasn't a long-haired individual. So their hair was cut.
Yeah.
And then how many Chicanos who would come before a judge would be given a choice? Jail or enlist, right?
Right.
That happened routinely. And
And
then,
if you enlist means you're going to shed your hair.
exactly. So it's going to make you an American one way or the other. And, you know, the Army, what they do is, you know, they cut your hair bald, they dress you all the same,
Been there, done that. Yeah.
they strip you of everything, your identity, and mold you into the single fighting machine, right? So, and then, so that was happening, cut your hair, enlist in the military. And then in terms of how we were treated in the courtroom, I think the Sleepy Lagoon trial is an example of that negative treatment by judges, by the criminal justice system.
You know, well, a couple of things I comment. First of all, on the hair cutting, remember, this is a nice old American tradition because that's what was done with Native Americans.
Right.
Forced to go to boarding schools, the first thing you did was cut off the long hair and make certain that the hair would always stay short. And the second thing is when you get to the Sleepy Lagoon, one of the interesting things about those trials is when they tried the Chicanos as a group, they were all convicted, but the 5 Chicanos whose families either had the money or able to find the money to have individual trials, none of them were convicted, which suggests that the evidence wasn't all that good to start with, which of course was shown in the retrial the following year.
And even what they allowed in as evidence, you know, that sheriff's official Ed Duran Ayers. Are you familiar with, you know, his testimony at the Zoot trial?
Not specifically, no.
He's the guy that says that when you look
Oh,
at,
yeah, he's the sheriff. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Who wrote about Chicanos, yeah.
and he just says that when you look at, analyze Mexicans, you have to do it from a biological standpoint because we are descendants of bloodthirsty Aztecs, and that we feel the need to let blood, and that when somebody is down, we don't think it's unsportsmanlike to kick somebody who is down. So that's how you have to look at and analyze the actions of Mexicans and Mexican Americans. You know, this was his testimony at that trial.
You know, of course, you know more about this than I do. There was a case just a couple of years ago up in the state of Washington in which an undocumented Mexican worker fell off a ladder working for a company. Turned out the ladder was defective, and he went to court and he sued, and he won the suit, but the jury gave him zero money in the suit. But during the trial, the prosecutor kept referring to him as an illegal immigrant. Well, this went up to the Washington higher court, and the higher court said that was declared a mistrial on the fact that he used the term illegal immigrant. The same worker did sue again. They had the same trial. He got a $1.7 million settlement. The only difference in the trial was not allowing the prosecutor to use the word illegal immigrant in terms of trying the case. So all it takes is just a word, a label, and you change the whole tenor of what's going on.
Yeah, because when you paint somebody as being illegal, then they didn't have a right to be here to begin with.
Right.
And if they didn't have a right to be here to begin with, they wouldn't have been here working. And if they hadn't been here working, he wouldn't have got hurt.
And therefore, it's his fault. And even though we find the company guilty, we're not going to give him anything.
Right.
No, but it shows the power of language, the power of the labels that are used. Yeah.
And that trial showed the power of the court, because the judge did not allow these folks to get haircuts in order to be presentable. Did not allow them a change of clothing. So whatever clothes you were arrested in were the clothes that you were supposed to present yourself in at trial. So it wasn't like they let the clothes out to be cleaned and pressed and then brought to the jail. So when you go to the jail, your clothes is rumpled up in a bag. And then when you go to court, you put it on. So you show up to court and you're all wrinkled. You know, you're all fachoso, which is the word that my mom used to use to just say that you are just not looking good. right? And it was just, that was one of the biggest trials of injustice that had ever occurred in U.S. history.
Well, it seems to me that what is so clear about it is the five Chicanos who had individual representation in individual trials, none were convicted, and all the others were. I mean, that alone shows that the court system did not work equally. And I bet those 5 kids who were tried individually did have clean clothes.
Right. They were able to probably.
Their attorneys could intervene. Yeah.
Right. Right. So there were, and that one went up on appeal. And after they spent, I think, 2.5 years in prison, you know, the appellate court overturned it, and they were all set free. But it had a profound effect on Henry Reyna's family and all the families of all the other folks that were involved.
Sure.
In terms of their inability to get jobs, you know, their decline into alcoholism and a variety of different things, because going to prison, especially where they were housed, that was not, these were people who were either 17, 18, or 19. They were juveniles that were housed with adults during that time period.
Yeah.
But,
you know, today we used the word trauma. You know, it's really coming out of the war, the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the word trauma is being used a lot. But what happened to Henry Leyva and those others was trauma. They lived with that trauma back at a time when people weren't dealing with that kind of an issue.
So we have felt the impact.
Oh, yeah.
Of what happened in 1940 to what happened during the Chicanos in the 1960s and the 1970s. Because think about when there was the fight for social justice in the civil rights movement in the 60s. What were the headlines? What was the general feeling of the populace, right? For farm workers, it's these illegal aliens that are here that have no business being here, asking for rights that they have no business asking for. You know, in terms of politics, in terms of voting, all these laws were put in place: poll tax, literacy tax, all these different, you know, legal and extra legal means in order to keep the other in their place. Do you see, being the historian that you are there specific time periods where you think that we have felt the consequences of the 1940s greater than others?
Oh, the consequences of the 1940s.
Well, in terms of the painting the other, the brown,
Oh, yeah. I would say particularly in the 1950s with Operation Wetback, when in fact the federal government had the biggest roundup of undocumented workers ever and shipped them out of the United States and called it Operation Wetback. So it used the pejorative, used the label. But I think this was not that far distant from the Zoot suitors and the events of World War II. So you still have the carryover. And that's why I would think that's probably the most important time.
Well, I had forgotten about Operation Wetback. That's right.
I think you can draw a straight line. You know, if you go too much further, when people don't remember the Zoot Suit riots, and it's not a comparable thing. But boy, Operation Wetback, there was fertile soil already there. And remember, you've got servicemen who participated in Zoot Suit riots and who talked about them. I had an uncle who was in the Navy, a Mexican uncle who was in and he said he just had to clam up at times. Yeah. Racist conversations on his ship, which went down in the Battle of the Coral Sea. But he had to just clam up with the last name Cortés. He was on these ships. These servicemen went back and become law enforcement officers.
Right.
Part of the what was then called the Border Patrol, the Immigration Service. So you've got some real live thinking in bodies, and it's not just the press coverage. You've got what they used to call the scuttlebutt of being in the service, which is being brought back into civilian life. And Operation Wetback is only 10 years later.
Wow.
So that is a time when you really see the impact.
And then those who were in the military during that time period who participated in the activities against Raza in LA.
Or heard about them from their comrades.
So they came out and they became not only police officers, but they became politicians. They became judges. They became teachers, educators. And that negative view that they had of the other, the Mexican other, right? That carried on.
Yeah.
So when there was a challenge to the way people were being taught, the response was always, it's not worth educating Mexican kids because they're not going to amount to anything. Right?
Oh, absolutely right.
Yeah. So
this is why these are historical battles are being fought. So when you see about the battle over getting ethnic studies into the curriculum, or getting ethnic studies high school graduation requirement now, are an extension of these struggles. I mean, it still goes on. And some of the opposition is a carryover of the thinking that led to the newspaper treatment and the law enforcement treatment of the Zoot suitors in early World War II. It's not the same, but it's connected in terms of the sort of collective memory of a country, and it's the collective memory we have to struggle against.
Right, and I believe
that
things
like getting Chicano ethnic studies into the schools is so important because it provides an alternative narrative for the kids.
Right,
that wasn't there before.
I think at some point, the powers that be understood the importance of Chicano studies, because I think that between 1980 and 1990, there was a very deliberate move to eliminate Chicano studies from the high schools, to eliminate Chicano studies from the colleges and the community colleges.
Yeah.
Because we saw that at UC Riverside.
Well, it happened at UC in 1984. Now
Yeah.
I was at the meeting when the vote was taken. Let's have they said they weren't getting rid of Chicano studies. They said we're combining Chicano and Black studies and forming a new ethnic studies department over the opposition, the unanimous opposition of the Chicano studies faculty and Black studies faculty. And when that vote was taken, I remember the chancellor calling me, said, Carlos, I know your summer coming up. This happened in May. He said, would you take the summer and help us get an ethnic studies program up and running by the fall? Because the idea was once they threw them together, it would disappear.
Right.
One of us met all summer and resurrected the Chicano and Black Studies program as part of ethnic studies. So it had an up and running program in the fall, which the faculty who voted against Chicano and Black Studies had no idea this was going to take place. So you're right about there was that time, the battles, and that was the start of sort of the second wave that built upon it to keep stories like the Zoot Suit riots alive, so
right.
They disappear from history.
You know, I've always heard they say the mythology surrounding the Pachuco. Well, being an English major, when I think of mythology, I think of good, strong stories, right? That where you took life lessons from a culture and created this mythology that could, guide people. Well, the Zoot Suiter itself is that kind of figure, but everything else, I say it's just false.
Well, there's also, and we got to mention it. Oh, by the way, there's a question came up. What year was that this occurred? 1984. It was referring to the getting rid of Chicano and Black studies on the campus. But while we're on World War II and the Zoot Suiters, Jorge, remember, we're talking about the media. We haven't mentioned Hollywood yet.
Right.
Hollywood stepped in on recreating World War II. Chicanos, even though Chicanos had the highest death rate and the highest percentage of medals of honor won by any group in World War II, we were almost totally left out of the World War II stories that were made by Hollywood. And the most dramatic was the story of Guy Gabaldon. In fact, I taught it to you. And Guy Gabaldon was a Chicano who entered in World War II. He happened to be raised by a Japanese family in Los Angeles after his folks were deported during the 1930s. And he learned Japanese. And in the Battle of Saipan, he actually went out and was able to talk to the Japanese in Japanese and convince the Japanese to surrender rather than fight to the death, which saved both Japanese lives and US lives in that battle. But when Hollywood made the movie, it was called Hell to Eternity. Guy Gabaldon became Gabaldon, and he became played by an Anglo. And so the Mexican here was one of our heroes. Here is a true Chicano hero in the military. In World War, not only do we have the Zoot Suit riots hanging over our head, we're even denuded and taken out of Hollywood recreations of World War II. And these are the kinds of ongoing battles that we face.
I think it was like maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, Guy Gabaldon's story came out on video, East LA Marine.
Finally came out. Yeah.
Finally came out, but that was a ton of years after.
Right, fine. And so this was happening at the time of Operation Wetback, see?
Right.
Well, in fact, we as others had to not exist as pro-American parts of the Hollywood story of us. So this media battle is one which, that's research I've been doing. You've got to fight all. How do you spell the name? Oh, there it is. Guy Gabaldon. I put up there. Thank you. Damien put it up. Hi, thanks, Damien.
Yeah.
One of my daughter's good friends.
Oh, cool.
So
My screen froze for.
Oh, your screen froze. Okay. Well, I'm still here. But what's interesting, Jorge, that even to this day, the Zoot Suit riots are still brought up. And you and I were talking about the other day in this Penny Dreadful, the show on City of Angels, the series was just finished on, I believe, on Showtime. In fact, they had a scene. It was set back in the 1930s. It was 5 years too early. But in fact, having the servicemen and the Pachucos having a battle in the streets of LA in the final episode of the show. So the sort of mythology, you mentioned mythology, the mythology of servicemen versus Chicanos is still being re-unearthed.
Yeah. I had so much hope and excitement when the idea of Penny Dreadful was coming out, and I knew that our good friends over at Zoot Suit, El Pachuco, made the costumes. They ordered 100
Sure.
Zoot Suits, and I said, okay, there's going to be a movie and a series about Zoot Suits. The very first episode, the character that's a cop uses Chicano in the very first episode, in like the first 15 minutes. You don't even see that anywhere else. Okay, great. By the second or third episode, you're introduced to Fly Rico, and he stands up to the cop, a Pachuco that stands up to the cops, and okay, we're going to have a good protagonist here, right? A good, strong character fighting injustice. And then the next 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes are about, you don't see a single character that has a job that's a Pachuco. You don't see a single character that's a Pachuco that is not either drinking or doing drugs. You don't see any positive portrayal whatsoever again, except for that one scene with Fly Rico at the hospital, at the candy machine. You never again see anything positive about a Pachuco. Not a guy with a job. All you see him is at the nightclubs, drinking and dancing.
It was funny because you had City of Angels come out at the same time as on HBO you had Perry Mason. Now Perry Mason only has one major Chicano figure, but she's powerful. She's smart,
Yes.
strong. She's hanging on to this little airport, a private airport she owns. And she has a scene with Perry Mason. She says, look, I'm Mexican. I know I've got to be twice as good in order to make a go of this airport. I mean, right. So it's funny. You can have, you now have in the media these efforts to make really interesting portrayals of rounded Chicano and larger scale Latino figures. And then some others that just play off the same stereotypes that you and I were talking about in the 1940s and the Hearst was doing.
But
it's discouraging on one hand. On the other hand, you're saying at least they're making some progress.
Well, I think what bugs me about Penny Dreadful is I would expect that of a white producer or a white writer. That's not the case with Penny Dreadful, though, right? Because it's a raza producer and a raza writer, right? Yeah. But it just goes to show that not enough is being taught about the Zoot Suit riots. Yeah. Not enough is being disseminated as it relates to the actualities of the Zoot Suit riots and everything else. You know, the inaccuracies I could kind of overlook. Like, for example, this was, you know, Penny Dreadful was set in 1938. They have Zoot Suits. Well, the Zoot Suit didn't come out till 1939, hit Harlem in 40, hit LA in 41. I could deal with that. The servicemen fighting in 1938 and not 1943. Okay, that's creative license. Okay, I can deal with that. But when you start adding all of those things together, it shows that there was a complete lack of understanding of what the Zoot Suit riots meant to us historically.
Well, you know, you used the word meant. As we're getting Chicano studies in the school, let's hope Jose Medina, our assemblyman, let's hope his bill passes to make ethnic studies a requirement, graduation requirement in high school. That's the only first stage of the battle. The second stage of the battle is do these important events. You mentioned the U.S.-Mexican War. You mentioned, we talked about Operation Wetback, the Asian program, Zoot said. But it's not only do we get those into the curriculum, are they taught in a way which makes some sense and gets at the meaning of the trajectory the Chicanos have experienced in the United States. So it's more, it goes beyond the events. It goes to meaning. And I think you've used exactly the right word, Jorge.
Well, we have, I think we have a duty and an obligation. And I think that's why whenever I ask you to do something, you say yes. That's why when Drew asked me to do something, I say yes. That's why when Ophelia asked me to do something, I say yes. I think we have a responsibility to just continue pressing forward with information, with accurate history. I remember when the students in the Riverside area wanted Chicano studies. It wasn't at the school, so Chicano student programs offered it over at the Chavez Center. Yeah. And they did that for 5 years, a community class every Thursday. Because those of us who have taken Chicano studies know the importance of it, and we want to make sure that the youngsters have a foundation of knowledge, an accurate foundation of knowledge that they could then build upon and add everything else.
Absolutely.
So in terms of your media work, what do you think today is the greatest threat as it relates to the media's portrayal of Chicanos?
Well, I think you hit it on the nose when you talked about City of Angels. It's taking culture out of context or decontextualizing culture, where you get the sort of superficial aspects of culture, but without the meaning beneath it. And if you don't have the meaning of the culture and this long trajectory that we're talking about, then the superficial aspects can look weird and exotic and even dangerous. And so this is a struggle when you say it's good to have Chicanos on the screen, which it is, but if they're decontextualized or not contextualized well, we end up by doing more damage to our image than not. That's the danger. It isn't just how much are we represented, and that's why statistical studies of representation really don't get anywhere. It's how are they done in a way that communicates an experience in an authentic sense, as opposed to a superficial and, let's just say, excitable sense.
It's interesting that even today, when you talk about Chicanos on a big screen, they're not being pushed on the big screen by the major companies. It's, for example, Netflix, giving money to independent filmmakers to do Gentrification, or doing the Iglesias show, or Epix doing Vida, V-I-D-A.
Yeah.
So it's not the major studios that are putting forth the images of raza on screen and in just everyday life, trying to struggle, trying to make it, being educated, being uneducated, to struggle. It's not the major film companies. It's these independent companies that are putting those things out.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of why after I wrote my book, The Children Are Watching, which is a study which came out in 2000 about how the media teach about diversity, I kind of went over to the other side and said, I got to get my hands dirty, and that's why I went to work for Nickelodeon, and for 15 years, as you well know, I was creative and cultural advisor for Dora the Explorer and Go Diego Go, to say, hey, I got to stop criticizing
And start doing something.
and help to see if I can help do something and make something that provides a better representation. I won't say a better image, a better representation of who we are.
And that's all we want, is a better representation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, not a perfected one. I mean, I don't. That's when we talk about City of Angels, or even Perry Mason. Lupe isn't a perfect character.
No.
Hey, so but she's tough and strong and wise, and she's not a stereotype. And this is the battle we face, and it's going to go on. But I guess I am more hopeful than not, and it's because I'm working in children's television. I'm working on a new children's show, preschool show right now, a Latino show. I can't even mention the name because I've got a non-disclosure agreement.
Okay.
It'll be out in the next 6 months. It'll start.
Right.
But in fact, when we have the opportunity, we've got to make some stuff and make a go of it. And say, once we get in there, we've got to make something that is things that are good representative of our community, but also got to be good entertainment.
Right.
If nobody watches us, then you've talked to the wind.
It's that fine balance. I'm not a filmmaker. I wouldn't even know what to do as it relates to filmmakers. But I think every one of our audience with their Apple phone is a potential filmmaker and a potential ethnographer, the preservation of history, culture, and all of that. But it's that fine balance between being entertaining and being representative.
Oh.
I'm not going to, I didn't blast Penny Dreadful on any, media sites or whatever. And this is probably the first conversation I've ever had about my thoughts on Penny Dreadful, because the fact that there are Chicanos on screen, they got jobs.
They got
right?
jobs.
And
there were cultural elements on screen.
Right. The dance scenes on that were just phenomenal, amazing. I had not seen a choreographed dance scene that fantastic since the movie Zoot Suit, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And right? I thought the mother was fabulous.
She is great.
It was fabulous, and even the character, the way it was done, it was those others. It was as if almost saying, we've got to do something sensational.
Right.
Do it, yeah.
And what's more sensational than the Pachuco, who is this, anti-society, anti-social, deviant, culturally deprived thug, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the accurate representation.
But you say, but let's take the good side of the thing, like City of Angels. It is giving employment. It is giving experience, and hopefully out of this experience become people who can take the next step in
Exactly.
making. Because we're going to be, whether you talk about ethnic studies or talk the media, or we're always in the image making battle.
Yeah.
That's just part of it.
So Carlos, what I want to do before we continue is I want to invite Ofelia
Oh, great.
to come on, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Cheech. But those of you who are writing chat comments, if you have questions, specific questions of Carlos, go ahead and type them out. That way, while Ofelia is speaking, we can review the comments, and then we can answer whatever questions you want. Even though we don't see you on the screen, we do want to get some input on you from you. And if you have any specific questions, then we'll go ahead and try to answer those. Ofelia, is your, are you?
I think I'm ready, Jorge. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes. I'm going to go back to you, Jorge, because I don't think you introduced yourself properly with regard to this topic, especially with regards to the Pachuco Ball. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit. But you both mentioned some points that I think I want to take from. You mentioned representation, Carlos, and the battle that we face. We look at when we have the opportunity, let's take it. And finally, that it had to be entertaining. And I say those or mention those points because it leads me to the Cheech and why we have the Cheech. We need to be represented. Certainly the art is so exciting because if you saw the first pieces of art that Cheech donated, the people that went to see it could really relate to the subject matter of that art. We had an opportunity to build a museum, a center for Chicano art and culture. And of course, entertaining, if we have the Cheech. So that's going to be very entertaining. But I wanted to bring you up to speed on what is happening very briefly. Everything is moving forward. We have the construction bid that is being analyzed by the city as I speak. The contracts that we need to begin construction are moving forward for approval to the city. And finally, if any of you would like, obviously, if any questions, please put them on the screen, but if you would like to donate at whatever level, we have a new text. I want to give it to you. It's 44321. Just write Cheech and you can donate. But something that I'm very excited about, because I wanted during this time when we're all in sheltering in place and buying, I don't know how many masks because they get dirty and you go to a lot of places. We have a new mask. And what does it say, Jorge?
The Cheech.
It's the
Oh my
Cheech.
God.
So I wanted to show you this because we can raise a little money for the Cheech. And if you would like to order one, just remember all the proceeds go for the Cheech. It's www.riversideartmuseum.org/the Cheech store. And I encourage you, you can be a promotion for us. And it's a very nice color. And don't I look fabulous?
But you
Jorge?
always look fabulous.
Thank you, Jorge. I was looking for that. Anyway, I want, though, to say this, that when we started what became the Pachuco Ball, goes back a little bit, and I want Jorge to elaborate on why it was important to include the whole topic of Pachucos and the car culture to add to the richness of what the Cheech will become.
All right, cool.
So thank you.
So to me, Zoot Suitor is a uniquely a Chicano iconic figure because we have Zapata, we have Villa, we have the Virgen de Guadalupe, we have Tonantzin, we have Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. We have all these iconic figures in our, history dating back. But the Zoot suitor, the Pachuco, that is uniquely a Chicano U.S. born figure. He wanted to be accepted. He wanted to be in style, and society just slapped him and tried to annihilate, beat, strip of dignity. And out of that 1940s, though, that figure arose to be a symbol of resistance, right? And the young homies, the Vatolocos, the lowriders, the car enthusiasts, we've always used that figure as like our guiding light. We wanted to dress like them. We wanted to be cool like them. We wanted to be stylish like them, right? Because they were just the epitome of strength and fashion and dignity. We wanted to be that. I remember in high school, I wore pleated pants. I wore my shirt tucked in, the creases in the front, 3 creases in the back. Everybody else is wearing khakis and winos, but I'm wearing French toes and pleated pants and my shirt because I wanted to be a Pachuco. That was my dream and my goal. So my entire life, I've spent trying to change that image of the Pachuco from this negative image that the press has, the negative image of the Cholo, the negative image of the lowrider. I spent my entire life trying to change that negative image. So when you came to me and said, hey, we want to do a car show, we want to do some stuff, the idea of having a Pachuco Ball where we all get dressed up and come together as family and eat food together and dance together and hang out together and do all of that, that was fantastic. That was just an idea that was simmering, in my heart for 1,000 years. And so we did Pachuco Ball #1. We had 2 bands. Everybody was on the dance floor. I remember you commented that you've never seen a dance floor always full. You've never been to a dance where everybody danced and everybody participated. And then we did Pachuco Ball #2, and Jose Medina came out all dressed up, and everybody who didn't wear a Zoot suit the first year, tried to wear it the second year. And tonight would have been Pachuco Ball #3. And I received a lot of text messages from people who said, hey, we really want it. We really want to go. We really want to participate, but we understand health over enjoyment, right? Because I don't leave my house. I go to work, I come home, that's it. So health over enjoyment. So it was Drew's idea to have this event in place of Pachuco Ball, but it is just a fantastic way. And the press coverage that we got the first year.
Wow. How many times do you see Chicanos dressed in red Zoot suits and black Zoot suits and hats, right? On the Press Enterprise front page. You don't get to see that often. So, but yeah.
Well, thank you, Jorge. You've done an awful lot. And even that idea that you've had for 1,000 years has come to fruition.
Yes.
And because of that, it's helping us build up the Cheech. So it is coming, and we're still scheduled to open by fall of 2021. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Okay. So Carlos, I think there were 2, there was a
I see
comment.
a couple of questions there, yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and handle those?
Well, I'll take them in the order. First comes from Joshua Dutcher and in fact, folks, continue to put questions up if you have them, and advice to public school teachers about how to include culture and history in the curriculum so they don't end up contextualized and superficial. Okay, Joshua, I read your question, and I just wrote down a couple of notes. Think about what you are, the event you are teaching. Think about the meaning you want to get across. Start with the meaning, and then build that as you decide what are you really trying to get across, and then put the events or the particular, or if you're using a piece of literature, then put that on top of it. Don't start with the event, because you may end up just giving an event as a decontextualized thing. But if you start with meaning, then you're going to know that what context you're going to have to build in order to get the meaning across. And if I'm not being clear about this, post it, and I'll keep going. Post another question. The second thing I would say, and this is speak to all my Chicano studies colleagues out there. One of the negative things, I'm a longtime academic. One of the worst things about academia is we get buried in the mosh pit called jargon. And I have noticed in the last 10 years that ethnic studies has sunk into that pit. And where a lot of good ideas are there, they're presented in a way which is almost incomprehensible for general folk. And keep in mind the old Albert Einstein statement, you don't know a topic well until you can explain it to your grandmother. Now, I admit there's a bit of sexism and a bit of ageism there. Whenever I try to want to explain something, I think about my grandmother. And if she wouldn't understand what I'm talking about, then what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. So avoid jargon, teach for meaning. I think those are the two short things I would mention. Someone else jumped in. If you can't really influence your layperson terms, the average, you ain't doing real work. Right on. I'm going to give you a high five or an air hug for that one. Absolutely. By the way, this is one of the reasons I got involved in the statewide controversy over the model ethnic studies curriculum that was debated at the Instructional Quality Commission last time. When the first model curriculum came out, there were a lot of good things in it. And I was very happy with many of the ideas, but it failed the Einstein test. It was not presented so that ordinary folks could understand. So I wrote, at the behest of the State Board of Education, I wrote a 10-page statement of principles for ethnic studies written for my grandmother and sent it in. And in the new curriculum that just came out, the new model curriculum that came out 10 days ago, my principles are there. They've been adapted, which is fine, because I actually want to talk to folks. So I think that's number one. The other question here, and Jorge, you joined me in answering this one, is in Valdez's play, this is in a private way, but so I won't mention the name of the person. In Valdez's play, he has the press as the prosecution in the court scene. Is this to emphasize the influence the press had on the trial? You'd have to ask Luis Valdez. I think so. Jorge's shaking his head. I say absolutely. He wanted to put the point that the press was omniscient and omnipresent in this, and in a sense, don't you think so? It was a trial by press.
It was, because the Hearst newspaper created a so-called Mexican crime wave, just out of whole cloth. Kerry McWilliams, who was at the Sleepy Lagoon Defense Committee, he wrote that article, and I sent it out as part of the materials that I wanted you to review prior to joining the Zoom. He laid out 5 misconceptions about the Zoot Suit riots. One that they were done by Mexican. Well, he claims 98% of the youth were Mexican Americans, second generation. They had been educated and socialized in America and not nowhere else. That there was a crime wave of youngsters. Most of the crimes were committed by adults. There was an increase in juvenile delinquency, but it was the same across the board for all people, black, white, brown. So it wasn't like there was an increase in Mexican juvenile delinquency. So Hearst, William Randolph Hearst, he really did not like Mexico, and he really did not like Mexicans. So he persecuted Mexicans in the press. And by persecuting Mexicans in the press, it got everybody to believe that Mexicans were in fact criminals. Yeah. And then you got the police to believe that Mexican were criminals. And then you got the judges to believe that Mexican were criminals. So that prosecution case, that persecution of Chicanos began in the newspaper.
No, absolutely.
So I think
and not only were they criminals, but you add to the others, genetically criminal.
Yes, biologically defective.
There's no use reforming someone because their genetics are going to be the genetics of criminality.
So we're defective and we're deviants is the message the Hearst. So we were persecuted in the press, and it had an effect on public opinion, and public opinion by officers and public opinion by judges.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one place we've made some progress. We've gotten enough Latinos into the working press now that you see I won't say more balanced, but a greater willingness to examine our experience in a broader and more contextualized way. Not perfect,
Right.
but boy, when you compare it with but that's when people say, oh, the history repeats itself, things aren't getting any better. No. All you got to go back to the Zoot riots and the press coverage, and you say, yeah, no, they're a little better now.
You know, we have come an amazing long way from the 40s to today's date. We have. I don't think that if anybody claims we have made no progress, then you have no understanding of history. But there are still some areas where we haven't seen progress. Police relations. We haven't seen, it seems to me that we haven't seen a whole lot of progress, even when we have, officials who happen to be Chicano or Latino or even Hispanic. We still have those issues because they still perceive a certain segment of society as being negative. On the judiciary level, we are still, I think we are less than 3% of the population statewide of judges, less than 3% of raza, whatever you want to characterize yourself as, Chicano.
We're 30% of the population, or 35 statewide.
Yeah. And in Riverside, I think we've got 5 out of 79, Yeah. A lot more than Ernie Lopez when I was a high school student,
Yeah.
right? But
I remember,
but not as much as there should be. I mean, we should be reflective. The number of judges, the number of teachers should reflect our numbers in the population. And it hasn't. So there are some areas that I still think that we need to push, some areas we still need to demand change.
Oh, lots of areas. By the way, Jorge, it's not only going for the change, but preserving the change that's happened. We talked about the elimination of Chicano studies in 1984 at UCR. So you can't get complacent about victories won. You've got to hold the line in the battlefield when you hold the line in battle to keep those gains.
Yeah, you have to fight to maintain what you got. And that fight seems to be, we're always, to put it in the terms of 1940s, we're at war. We're at war to gain a foothold, and we're at war to maintain what we got up to this point.
Both of them. And by the way, we got some other questions coming up about the question, why was Hearst going against Mexicans? And someone answered, a white racist who used scapegoats to make dollars and increase his power. There's that old, you've talked about that, the book you read about Hearst and Mexico. But there's an old journalistic expression called, if it bleeds, it leads. You want to make money. You want to sell papers. Get sensationalism up front. Mexicans were perfect for sensationalism, perfect targets. I don't know whether or not Hearst inside, I can't psychoanalyze him, inside had a particular animosity toward Mexicans. He may have, and the book you mentioned, Mazon's book sort of suggests that. But it almost doesn't make any difference because we were damn convenient.
Right.
Convenience of Mexicans. Whatever the impetus going in Hearst, it didn't make that much difference in the fact that behaviorally what he did was attack Mexicans and sold papers. And as someone said, put a big dollar sign down and the post put up there.
Hearst is considered the father of yellow journalism.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And yellow journalism is the sensational headlines, sensationalist, in order to sell papers. He is known as the father of yellow journalism.
Yeah.
So
the irony is that yellow journalism didn't start out as yellow journalism turned out to refer to a comic strip called The Yellow Kid, which had nothing to do with what we're talking about. But over time, though, it appeared in the papers, and then that became the label they used for the kind of journalism we're talking about. But if it bleeds, it leads.
yeah.
It still works.
Yeah, Fox, somebody posted on here, just a precursor to Fox News. Yeah, right? Because that's exactly what we see when we turn to that newspaper.
Oh, we got a new one I got to read over here. You go talking, I'll read it and see.
That's from our good friend. So I think Hearst developed that crime wave. Honestly, he had anti-Mexican sentiments that appeared in press early on.
Yeah.
I would like to know whether he was friends with any of those companies, like Phelps Dodge, all those companies that were kicked out of Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. I would like to know whether he was contemporaries, friends with, dinner partners with, those kinds of people.
I don't have an answer. I'd have to call another one of my graduate students, Dan Lewis, who wrote a book on, who did his PhD under me and wrote a book on the what was called the SP de Mex, which was the Southern Pacific of Mexico. It was the Southern Pacific Railroad's a branch in Mexico, and Dan wrote his book on that. He would probably know, but Dan's probably not on the line today.
Yeah, I didn't see him. All right. So any other questions that you folks want to, you should take advantage of the fact that you've got Carlos right here. You've got Carlos right here at your fingertips.
You know, I'll throw one in here because it's not, as I was thinking about our meeting tonight, we talked about we were going to talk about the media. I was thinking about how when movies and television are more my thing than the press itself in my research. But the few movies that made Latinos, particularly Chicanos, major figures and good figures in movies, have made women Chicanas. And I was thinking, this case with Lupe in Perry Mason is part of that long tradition. Because as I was thinking of watching Lupe in Perry Mason and his new Perry Mason, I was thinking back to the 1950s. There was that great Western, High Noon with Gary Cooper fighting. The most dramatic and interesting figure in the whole movie is Helen Ramirez, is a Chicana who owns the saloons, has to leave town, and she actually is the one person who understands what's happening and can sit down with Grace Kelly, who is Cooper's wife, and explain, here's what's going on, please understand. And if I were still with Gary Cooper, I was still his woman and not you, I would be there fighting for him. Because here is the way the world works. She gives her a lesson. And in a sense, what happened in that movie, she became the press. She became the Chicano press, which really didn't exist very dramatically at that time. We had La Opinion in Los Angeles and San Antonio, some places, but we didn't have the alternative voices to speak out. And we had almost no Chicanos in the press itself, working for the newspapers at that time. It really isn't until the 1960s, early 70s, that we began to break through into the press. So getting our voices heard through the media has really been a battle.
Yeah, and if we did, it was independents like La Raza newspaper in Los Angeles, or these different community newspapers.
This is an interesting comment with coming of Kamala from Kamala Harris. Maybe with Kamala, I guess it refers to Kamala Harris. Tell me if I'm wrong on that one. Kamala Harris is raising a new kind of thinking already. because of the inability of the media and even her opponents to categorize her.
Right.
Because of being of being of mixed background. And I think this is a time when Latinos have been a mixed people. And we go back to La Raza Cosmica, to the whole Mexican, the interaction of Spanish and native Mexicans, and even Afro-Mexicans, and later Asian Mexicans, blending together, that in fact is our blend that has been one of the complications in the way we were treated by the media. In fact, treated maybe by the courts and other things, because we don't fit. I mean, look, even the US Census has trouble figuring out where to place us. It's still going on. And my sense is mixedness, as mixedness becomes more, I hate to use the word normal, but I will say normalized in America, that maybe we're going to be seen in a different light. Maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, maybe for both. But in fact, these are the kinds of upfront issues that this person, I guess, Kenneth Gaines posted over here, of identification, that I think are beginning to seep into public consciousness and into discussions. I hope so.
That makes two of us. And a side note, Kamala Harris is my classmate from Hastings.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The question is, are there any connections between the Bracero program and the race baiting in the city of Los Angeles? Was LA just a high population of Mexicans at that time due to the Bracero program, and thus driving a need to criminalize Mexicans so they would go out of LA? Just wondering. So the interplay between the Bracero program, Operation Wetback, and the demonization of Chicanos in LA.
Well, one of the things, to keep the timeline straight, Zoot riots, the repatriation program was in the 1930s. The Zoot riots were in the early 40s. The Bracero program started in 1947. It started afterwards. And then of course Operation Wetback comes in the 50s. But they don't happen simultaneously. But the collective memory instilled by the media, et cetera, is still there. So the Bracero program filters right into this collective memory, and Braceros, they use the kind of a jargonistic term, get othered. They get popped into the otherness category that most other foreign workers didn't. And I use foreign. My European immigrant grandparents were never othered in that sense. They weren't physically distinguishable. They weren't identified. They didn't have a term bracero laid on top of them. And so they had other stigmas. They didn't have that stigma. And so the braceros started with stigma because of the labeling of the program. And the second is because its connection to the kind of ethos that was established in the media in during World War II, particularly with the Zoot riots.
So there's somebody says, I was taught that part of the white anger with and frustration towards Pachucos and Zoot suits was that they were seen as exhibiting excess in wartime, in a time of conservation, that a population that the dominant culture preferred to be silent and invisible were refusing to do precisely that, to remain in the background. So there was the McLaren, I think there was that one slide that I put up that talked about how, let me see if I could find it and put it up, how they used, there was a prohibition against the excess use of wool, and how they saw Chicanos as being anti-American because they chose to wear these clothing that they saw to be excessive. So let me see.
Well, you know, yeah, and they mentioned Frank Sinatra. And here's the thing, here's the deal, as Joe Biden would say. Here's the deal. Frank Sinatra, white skin, even though he's Italian-American, light skin, puts on a Zoot suit, that's one thing. Chicanos put on the same Zoot suit, it's something else. Because they're still part of that otherness that exists. And that's, oops, there you go.
Yeah. So the Warren Act is a War Times Act, which basically would prohibit, the making of certain things and making sure that everything that was made went directly to the War Act. But you have to remember that the Hearst Press and even the LA Examiner, they created an image of the Chicano as being un-American, long hair, un-American, wearing Zoot suits, un-American. It's showing the Zoot suits as the wearers as being German sympathizers, as being people who would not qualify for induction into the army because they were, seen as defective, right? So, I think the impetus behind the Zoot Suit Wars wasn't because of the wearing of the Zoot suit. I think it was part of it, but I don't think that it was all of it.
No, it was symbolic. Well, but that the person who, but I can't see the post anymore, posted that, has raised a bigger issue, which I think we need to at least touch on. The fact, because he mentioned the Chicanos, were they trying to participate, become more American by wearing a Zoot suit, or trying to stand out as being different? I think that is part of a basic theme in all of Chicano history, is wanting to be part of the mainstream, but also not losing their speciality. And that's a tight walk. It's a narrow line, and sometimes you slip over to one side, you slip over the other. And that's why you get among some Chicanos who I don't want to learn the man's way. That's selling out my culture. But you and I, we haven't sold out who we are simply because we've learned to function, you as a judge, me as a professor, and all that. That in fact, it's a tight line that I find when I work with young people, young Chicanos, I say, look, you're not selling out your culture by learning to function better in the mainstream culture. It's only if you give up that sense of identity in joining it. And I separate that acculturation is perfectly fine. Whether or not you want to assimilate and give up that thing, that sense of your heritage and all that, that's a choice you have to make. But it's not a necessary that you have to give up. And I think it's that long battle and that long tension is simply, it's going to be an ongoing part of the Chicano experience.
I think I carry my Chicanismo with me wherever I go. The fact that I am a judge means absolutely nothing. It's what I do for a living. It's how I pay my bills. But I don't see that is the defining characteristic of who I am. What defines me as a person is in fact my Chicanismo, my sense of self, my sense of placement.
So you haven't given it up.
I have not, and there's no one who sees me either on the bench or in the hallways, that's going to say, that's a coconut over there. He's completely, just giving up on his history and cultura. I don't know that I will ever be accused of being that. I would probably be accused of being too Chicano as opposed to not a Chicano at all.
It's funny. I work with a lot of people. You can't tell on the screen now, and you can't tell in yours. You use an accent over your A in Jorge and Hernandez, right?
Right, Hernandez.
Then over my E in Cortés. It doesn't show up here. But I know many Latinos who have given up the accents simply because it's too much trouble, and yet they continue to pronounce their names as if the accent were there. So it's those little things that you talk about, self-definition, that you decide what you want to. And I'm not negative about those folks. They just say it's just too damn much trouble. I have to fight this battle where I insist on using the accent. Simply, I'd rather just say, no, I'm not giving it up. And if you're going to know me, you're going to know me with an accent. So these are the little daily battles we face.
And I've heard a lot of people say, look, where I work, it's impossible for me to be. Among my peers, it's impossible for me to be. And there are just some very simple acts of resistance. That doesn't have to be like in your face. Forcing people to call you
Jorge instead of George.
Yeah.
Right? Just that simple. My name is Jorge, not George. Don't try to change my name. Just those very small little things are just powerful forms of resistance. And it doesn't take a whole lot. You're not carrying a sign. You're not, jamming people up. You're not in somebody's face. But it's that simple resistance that you could do in your little world, that little square world at work, with your friends and everything else, that makes a world of difference. When I was talking to somebody the other day, and his name, he called himself George. Last week, I had kidney stones. So I was in the emergency room, and the tech says, George. But the Mexican workers who were doing the cleaning and the mopping kept referring to him as Jorge. So I looked at him and I said, Tocayo, because, I'm Jorge, he's Jorge. I go, how come, some folks call you George and other people call you Jorge? He goes, well, that's just what they do. I go, well, have you ever tried to correct them? And he said, no. I think that if he corrected them, just that very simple correction, my name ain't George, my name is Jorge, I think that would be enough, and that would carry the day. Yeah. But then again, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah. But, there's a psychic struggle to be the other. And so that's why I'm not critical of people who make that choice, even though I wish, like you, that they did those little acts of resistance.
Right.
I'm fully in agreement.
So Drew is saying that it's 8:40, and she wanted to know, do we continue the conversation, or what do you folks want to do? So why don't, in order for us to continue the conversation, we need more questions. Right, Carlos?
Yeah, I can blabber on for 24 hours, but I don't think people are here. You're going to see names disappearing from the screen. And so, yeah, if we've exhausted all the questions that are out there, I'm looking at little notes I wrote down. And we've covered almost everything we thought of talking about. My gosh, we have covered a lot tonight, right?
Yeah.
I would just say to everyone out there, this conversation that Jorge and I have had tonight is not a conversation just to be filed away. We're talking about an ongoing process in which all of you can be involved. And I do. Once I got involved in this ethnic studies struggle for statewide, when I go out and talk to community groups, I said, look, if the Jose Medina bill is adopted and ethnic studies becomes a required local thing, that's when you get involved. Right. At the beginning, have a say-so. Be down there at school board meetings. Get on committees. That the struggle to make certain that the kind of thing Jorge and I have talked about to now, not just the events, but the meaning, the trajectory, you're going to be winning those battles at the local level. And if you don't fight them, someone else will get represented and you won't. And and if you won't, then we won't. And so that's why everyone who's online tonight can be part of this process.
Right, and you have to be like, you lay down the 5 principles. You went and you laid down some things that you thought were necessary, for the effective teaching of it. I think that we need to monitor also how things are being taught. Some of these colleges will let you come and sit in. I don't remember the technical term for that. It's when you can sit in on a class. I forgot the technical name of that. But, so be involved.
Auditing.
What is it?
Auditing a class.
There you go. Audit a class, right? And so just, go in and just see how it's being taught and seeing what level it's being taught. And is it being broken down in language that our students could, in fact, understand what's going on? And then, every one of you that teaches Chicano studies or that's going to teach Chicano studies, bring in speakers. Carlos is available, right? Carlos is available. I am available.
I'm still alive, yeah.
Ninfa Delgado is available. Ofelia is available. Jose Medina is available. I mean, we have such a strong group of UCR Chicano alumni, and we will go everywhere and anywhere in order to continue this conversation or to have a new conversation or to just talk about any topic that you're going to be teaching that day. The beauty of interactive teaching is we have so many historical figures and so many people who have sat through history that they could come and talk to you about any given subject. And that just makes it easier to learn.
There was a question here, and see it from Kevin Fernandez when introducing Zoot topic to someone. What one single meaning will you come out of it? You might have a different view than I do, Jorge. I would say it would be inequitable treatment based on ethnicity, combined with the ongoing struggle and sometimes success of Chicanos to reduce that inequitable treatment. Don't just teach, there's a bunch of terrible things that happen and walk off and leave it. What counts is the fact that the community drew strength from this and continued to battle. It's easy to, if we have a thing that as a diversity trainer, we talk about calling admiring the problem. Well, if you just admire the problem, you get nothing done. One of the great things about working with Jorge, he didn't take Chicano history and admire the problem of what was done to us. He went out to do something. And so the combination of here's what happened, here is an equitable thing, and here are the efforts, some succeeding, some failing, to overcome inequities. And if that second part of the trajectory isn't there, then it hasn't been worth it teaching about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I would approach it.
I don't think I could have put it any better than that. I don't think I could have put it any better than that.
Great session. I like that one. Maybe we ought to close out right now. The first nice thing we've heard from anyone on the line. I'm just kidding. Great session. All kinds of stuff. Lots of stuff in this.
Okay, so plug for next Saturday. So I was online on a phone call today with two early photographers of the Chicano movement, Luis Garza and Oscar Castillo. They work with La Raza newspaper in Los Angeles. They covered the East LA blowouts. They covered the Chicano moratorium. And they just covered, just life in general. And next Saturday from 6 to 8, we're going to do another Zoom chat. But that Zoom chat is going to be with Luis Garza and Oscar Castillo. So the idea of a Zoom chat, and I guess this is a new way that we will have discussions and interactions and, teaching is going to be, I guess the Zoom way is going to be the new way. So that's going to take place.
Marissa Yeager put up, what about the music? I think I would suggest you will be doing stuff on music too, right, Jorge?
Right. I've got some music that I've got lined up, but folks, every one of you that signed up for this got a link to a SoundCloud program that I put together on Pachucos. It's commentary, poetry, and music. And music from Lalo Guerrero, music from Don Tosti, Las Hermanas Padillas, some music that is paints Chicanos and Zoot suiters in a positive light and some that don't. So I tried to put together a collection of music. And what I was going to do after our Zoom today is just play some music, but it being 8:51, 9 minutes left, I'm probably going to only play 2 songs before, we close out for the evening. But you have that program and you can download that program. And anybody that wants that program on a disc, I will burn it on a disc for you and I will send it to you. Just, send a request to Drew Oberjurgi from the Riverside Art Museum, and I'd be more than happy. I also have Lalo Guerrero. I have a compilation of Pachuco music by Lalo Guerrero. I also have our Hoolies record, Pachuco Boogie. I've got 3 extra copies. When you go on eBay now, people want $50, $60, $70, $80, $100 for that. I don't burn other people's CDs. I don't bootleg, but I've got one that, I'll figure out which one of you is worthy, and I'll send it to you. So there's a lot of music that I can share, and I can share it for free.
Jorge, I got it. Before you move on, we just got one says, thank you. We need more Zoom session to help keep us sane. Is that what we're in this for? Keeping people sane?
Well, for my sanity, probably, because I don't get to go out much anymore.
Oh, this is fabulous. No, I've enjoyed this so much, and I want to say thanks to folks out there. All the stuff you're putting up in the chat room, that's great.
So here's what I want to do before we end. I want everybody to put their video on so that we could see who is up, and then we can take a shot of the screen so that when we post it on the Riverside Art Museum, we can see all the beautiful faces, all the beautiful participants who have taken time out of their lives to listen and to just partake in this. I see my good friends, the Perez's. I see Marisa, Miss Pritchard, Miss Lozano. I see, let's see, Mary Vertiz. I see Ninfa. I see, so let's see, I'm going to click.
There's my friend Damien. Damien is my daughter's best friend in LA. Ah.
Right. Oh, and I see your daughter, Alana.
Sure.
I see, there's an arrow to the right, and you can hit that and it'll hit the next page.
If I hit an arrow to the right, I'll probably sign myself off. I'm such a
And then
nerd.
we got this kick-ass artist named Lisa Cabrera. Hey, hi there, ma'am.
There's my daughter, yeah.
I'm a follower of your work. Miss Linda Obershaw, Juanita Bigelow, Art Varela, Joy, is it Eggins? Yvette Reynoso. I've got, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to hit the arrow again. And then a lot of people did not, like Cristina Gordy Regalado from Paris did not, she didn't want us to see her face. UVB, I see you. Lilia Acevedo, I see your name, but I don't see your máscara.
This is
Charlotte McKenzie.
Thanks for doing this. This is
Jim
great.
McCarthy. So folks, this is wonderful that you guys have been able to join us this evening. This is the new normal. And it's wonderful that you folks have agreed to share your night with us. Make sure to register for next week's event. I think the registration will go up on Monday. There will be limited spots again, so make sure. Now, folks, there were a lot of people who were trying to sell tickets to this event. This event was free. So those fools who were trying to sell tickets at $15 a pop for this program, if you see them, please say free event, no money involved. No money involved. Right?
Always wanting a chamba, always.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do, Let's see. Kenneth Gaines, we had a real nice conversation with him and his wife earlier. That was fantastic. I see you there. Let's see, who else? Sonia Gonzalez, is it Metelac? Right? Kanai Hupai, I see you. Kevin Fernandez. Okay, all you folks. So take a Snapchat of that, or a shot, I should say. Oh, Lee, how you doing, sir? ¿Cómo estás? So wonderful. So we started on time, no Chicano time. We're going to end on time, no Chicano time. Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.
Love spending the evening with you.
Gracias. That was cool. Oh, Gordy, you came up. Hey, and your daughter. Nice, right? Russell Garcia. Right on. Fantastic. Patricia.
We gonna do music, Jorge?
Let me do it. I'll do a couple of songs in order to get out. So let's do Pachuco Boogie by Don Toasty.
boogie, el boogie. Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie. Boogie, el boogie. Boogie, el boogie. Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie.
¿Ese dónde la lleva, pues?
Pues si no voy, vengo del Paciente, ve, es un lugar que le dicen El Paso, nomás que de allá vienen los pachucos como yo, ve. Me vine aquí a Losca, ve, me vine a parar garra, porque aquí está bote de aquella, aquí se pone bote alerta todo, ve. Oiga, ¿sabe? Vamos a dar un volteón, vamos y nos ponemos bote tirili, y luego, mano, pues qué suave, venga, porque quiero que me cante, ve, quiero que le haga bote al alba, ve. Órale, cánteme una cancioncita, nos ponemos bote alerta, cánteme, suénele, viejo, suénele. Usted ha de estar más tigre que nada porque le suena bote de aquella vato. Simón ¿sabe qué? Ya me agüité vámonos al rol. Vámonos al rol ya me quería me cantón. Al rol vato ya por derecho ya, al rol Boogie, el boogie. Boogie, el boogie.
Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie. Boogie, el boogie. Boogie, el boogie. Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie, Pachuco boogie.
All right, Ninfa, get up.
Carnal, póngase abusado, ya los tiempos han cambiado. Usted está muy agüitado y está bote atravesado. Antes se bailaba el swing, Boogie Woogie Jitterbug, pero esto ya torció y esto es lo que sucedió. Los chucos suaves bailan rumba, bailan la rumba y le zumba, bailan guaracha sabrosón, el botecito y el danzón. Los chucos suaves bailan rumba, bailan la rumba y le zumba, bailan guaracha sabrosón, el botecito y el danzón. Los chucos suaves bailan rumba, bailan la rumba y le zumba, bailan guaracha sabrosón, el botecito y el danzón. Esa buena vaina, pues, vamos a guarachar, pues, carnala. Nel, que swing, Nel, eso del swing ya chale, ve. Porque de esto ya chale el swing, esa. Hasta la buena rumba, ve. A mover muy aquella, acá la buena cadera, ve. Cada sábado en la noche yo me voy a bolotear con mi linda pachucona, las caderas a menear. Ella le hace muy de aquella cuando empieza a guarachar y al compás de los timbales yo me siento petatear. Los chupos suaves bailan rumba, bailan la rumba y le zumba, bailan guaracha sabrosón, el botecito y el danzón. Los chupos suaves bailan rumba, bailan la rumba y le zumba, bailan guaracha sabrosón, el botecito y el danzón. ¡Ah! Hágale muy de aquella fuerza. Esa, cuando yo se lo guacho, me siento muy al alba con usted. Oiga, le gusta el borlote, tíreme la cadera para acá. ¿Sabe qué pienso que le digo? Quiero un bolo con usted. Chava, bolota ese baile. I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come back. Wisa gacha, wisa gacha. Esa wisa es dura, porque que uno quiere volotear. ¿Qué tengo conmigo y mi baile? Usted es muy dura, usted nos pone del alba, usted se piensa muy suave con usted. Oiga pues, ¿usted de qué se piensa? Pues ahí nomás está sentadota, ¿para qué viene este bolote? Pues ahí nomás está sentada. Wisa, wisa gacha, wisa, wisa gacha. ¡Bájale! ¡Epa! Sí me gusta, sí me gusta. Todo el mundo va a bailar. Wisa, wisa gacha, wisa, wisa gacha. Esa, cuando yo se lo guacho, me siento muy al alba con usted. Oiga, ¿le gusta el borlote? Tíreme la cadera para acá. ¿Sabe qué pienso que le digo? Quiero un bolo con usted. Chava, bolota y este baile. I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come back. No, no.
See, the vernacular of the Pachuco is very distinct, man. It's very formal in their language, usted, even though they're using the vernacular, right? And you have to grow up among Pachucos or somebody who was descended of Pachucos to even figure out half of what they're saying. The first song I played, Pachuco Boogie, he says, no supe que la pajoleabas así. Well, you got to figure out it's the word pájaro, pajoleabas, you sing like a bird, right? So you have to listen to it in order to pick out kind of the root words, right? In order to figure out what's being said. I was lucky in that my tío who lived in Santana was a Pachuco. My tía Lola had the tres puntos right there, and she wouldn't talk about the tres puntos. She wouldn't talk about the three dots, right? I go, tía, ¿qué es eso? Oh, I can't talk about that, mito. I go, tía, that's the tres puntos, right? She goes, shh, I can't talk about that. But just the language and talking to them, you were able to pick up a lot. And some of it, I get the gist of what they're saying, but I couldn't define some of what they're saying because that Pachuco language was very distinctive. And some of it is alive today, but not as much as that. Now, the two main purveyors of Pachuco music was Lalo Guerrero and Don Toasty. Lalo tells me, because I interviewed him at length several times, he was working at a bakery at night, and there was a Pachuco from Los Angeles who worked at the bakery. So he learned the music, the verbiage from him. And then Lalo went to Los Angeles with a group called Los Carlistas. And he was performing downtown. And after he would perform his set, he would go to the clubs and hang out with the Pachucos. So his early music is not what we thought it would be. You know, you think swing, horns, all of that. His early Pachuco music was just 3 guitars and corro. And the first song was El Pachuco. The second song was La Pachuca. The third song was La Boda de los Pachucos. And all of it was done ranchera style almost, with Lalo doing the voices of the men and the women, right? You know, when he asked her to get married, vamos a tirar un manazo. Well, join hands, right? Manazo. So doing the language on that. Don Toasty, his name is Donaldo Tostado. And he was an accomplished, he played with all the big bands. He played with, you know, Les T. Garden and all these other people. And the way that Pachuco Boogie came around, the mythology around that was that Raulito Diaz, Don Toasty, and another musician whose name escapes me, they were going to do a backup session. So the studio time was paid for in advance, and the main singer didn't show up. So the producer turns to Raulito and Don Toasty and says, hey, you got something you want to record? And they recorded Pachuco Boogie, laid it out on a 45. And that was it sold 1 million copies. That 45 was the first time a Chicano had sold 1 million copies of a song. Now, of course, we didn't get played on the airwaves. We did not, right? There was a radio program in Los Angeles that played from like 4 to 6 a.m. It was called Los Madrugadores, and they were actually also artists as well. So some of the music got played then, but nowhere else. So even when Mexicans got to hear their music, they got to hear it at a very limited time, 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. But those of us whose mothers used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to make the food so that the workers could get to work at 4 o'clock in the morning, well, that would be the time that they would hear Los Dandies, Los Trios, Pachuco Boogie music, and everything else. So when you listen to this, some of the words you can make out, but some of it you can't. I want to play a tune by Lalo Guerrero. It's called Muy Sabroso Blues. Now, Lalo's first group was Trio Imperial. And then his second group was Los Cinco Lobos. And that one was what we come to know as swing and boogie. But it's a love tune as well.
Yo tengo una novia que sabe querer. Cuando me besa yo no sé qué hacer. Me siento muy sabroso. Me siento muy sabroso. Yo no sé lo que siento cuando mi baby me besa así. Me da mi abracito y me da mi apretón y luego un besito y rom, pom, pom, pom. Qué lindo besa mi baby. Qué lindo besa mi baby. Cuando me besa mi baby, me siento desmayado. Me pongo a temblar, me dice mi baby, arrejúntate más, y yo me voy al cielo, y yo me voy al cielo, y yo me voy al cielo, yo no me quedo aquí. en la sala, sobre el sillón, baja las luces y mi corazón me suena pom, pom, pom. Pom, pom, pom. Me suena pom, pom, pom. Pom, pom, pom. Qué lindo besa mi bebé, esa sí sabe besar.
All right. I note that it's 9:13. So Karen, you seem to be the only host. What would you like to do, my dear? Oh, no, Drew's there.
Drew's, yeah, Drew's, I was gonna say Drew's still on. Yep.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's enjoying it, right?
Let's see, the 12 that are, let's see, 4,
And Val's
4,
on.
8,
Val's
12.
on.
I think there's like 15.
Or hey, Nymph looking for some dancing.
Yeah, but see, Ninfa's a dancer, right? You know, Ninfa that looks familiar in the background. I think I did that one by hand. Oh my goodness, you've got 2 of them up. I do some Dia de los Muertos stuff as well, so that's funny. Okay, I'll play. Let me play 2 more songs because I know that some of you want to stay up forever. I don't mind, but Drew's got a baby. We got to be mindful. So let's do. Let's do Los Blues by Don Toasty, and then Mambo del Pachuco. And you got to notice that, Pachuco Boogie is a mixture of the songs that, the song that I played at the beginning, Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman at the beginning of the show. That was the style of the music that was playing in the late 30s and early 40s. Pachucos took that music and added stuff to it, like the mambo and just different. Just added a kind of that riff on the bottom, but then laid some stuff on top. So let's do Los Blues, and then we'll do Mambo del Pachuco, and then we'll do Chicano Boogie, and then we'll end out.
Anoche me fue el baile, me fui a volotear.
When to dance.
Anoche me fui al baile, me fui a volotear.
I want to go dance.
Me encontré con una chava.
Ooh, I met up a woman.
Hizo hasta parpadear.
Ooh, made my heart flutter.
Yo luego Luis le dije, no quiere usted chanclear.
Chanclear is to dance.
Yo luego Luis le dije, no quiere usted chanclear. No se haga vista gacha, vámonos a vacilar.
Don't play me, don't play me.
Bailamos un buen recle y luego se cansó. Te ofrecí un trago, hice como 22. Uy, uy.
Recla is a record. Una recla, one record.
Y usted a mí me gusta, no hace que usted asusta.
Even though you're scared, I like you.
Y me besó tan suave.
Ooh, baby.
Yo no me fijé.
Ooh, baby.
Tenía cuerpo de uva y las patas de palo. Uy, uy.
My feet flutter. She kissed me so good, made my feet flutter.
Pero yo no la cambio por otra más bonita.
I wouldn't change it for a better looking girl. I like this one.
Las bailas más bonitas, luego quieren ser las misas que te dicen lo que tú tienes que hacer, nene.
The pretty ones tell you what to do.
Eso no es pa' mí, hijo.
That's not for me.
Yo con mi pachuquita.
So is he saying his Pachuca chick isn't cute?
Tan suave que yo no me fijé, tenía cuerpo de uva y las patas de palo. Uy, uy. Baby, aquí me visita. Pero yo no la cambio por otra más bonita.
So somebody is asking for images of Pachuco Ball. I think that Ninfa will try to post some of that. Mambo del Pachuco. Only Ninfa knows how to dance the mambo.
Pachuco mambo, pa pa pa, para bailar, pa pa pa. Pachuco mambo, pa pa pa, para bailar. Mambo, Pachuco mambo, mambo, para cantar mambo. Pachuco mambo, mambo, para cantar. Pirum 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 pam pam, pirum 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 pam pam, padam pam 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 pam, pirum 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 pam 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 pam, total leon pam 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 pam, total pirum 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 pam pam, pirum pirum pam pam, pirum pirum pam pam pam, total pirum.
Ninfa is posting some images from her cell phone. Drew, would it be possible, you know the link to Shutter Stories, the people who did our photograph? If you could put that link on Facebook, you click it, and it shows you every single couple that took a picture, because we had a photo booth, and everybody took, you know, solitary pictures themselves with, you know, their date, and then group shots. And for year one and year two, you'll see everybody who, and then like Ninfa did one where it was a group of people that, you know, got squeezed in together. I made the backdrops for it. I did 2 Pachuco silhouettes as a backdrop for year one. Year two, I did a car as a backdrop made out of wood. So if you should be able to, see those. And if you want to buy prints, you can buy prints directly from Shutter Stories. For example, if, you know, you lost your camera or whatever, and you went, you could buy your, you know, picture yourself if you wanted to do that. If you noticed in that last song, Pachuco Mambo, you know, you heard of scatting, right? Like Louis the Prima. Chicanos scat too. Chicanos were scatting in the 40s, right? So that was an example of using scat, the sound making, in a song. And it appears in Pachuco Boogie version 1 and Pachuco version number 2, because there are 2 versions. The first one that sold 1,000, and then I don't know why they redid a second one. So to end our program tonight, let's do Chicano Boogie. And that just goes to show you that the word Chicano existed in the 40s as well. And more scatting.
Usted nunca ha oído el Pachuco Boogie, ¿verdad? Este Chicano Boogie está más loco. Si lo han oído, mano, le puede bailar el Boogie y le puede mover la caderota en la guarachosa, mano, porque guache, tiene tiempo de rumba y tiene el Boogie este. Póngase locote, mano, oiga este batote, ahora que viene el Boogie y la rumba. Locote. Aquí le borlotea como usted quiere esa huiza, mano. También los huizos le pueden borlotear el boogie, le puede sonar a todo lo que usted quiera, mano. Está todo locote, mano, porque aquí tiene la rumba y el boogie, órale, suénele. Bueno, pues ahí los guachos, mano, ya me voy otra vez como la otra vez,
That was fantastic. So let me be, it's going to go into the next one. And I'll lower the volume so we could say goodbye. So thank you all for participating. We've got Lilia, we got Gordy, we got Ophelia, Valerie, we have Yvette that froze her picture. We have Anita, Drew, Karen, Lisa Cabrera, Ninfa, Renee, and Kenneth Gaines. Hey, Lilia, how are you? Lilia was a student of mine at Chicano Studies at Mount San Jacinto Community College. So there's a lot of names that I know and a lot of people that I know. Miss Cabrera, I've never met you, but I'm familiar with your artwork. So I hope to meet you one day. You know, I was telling people that if I had kids during COVID time and I had a boy and a girl, my girl's name would be Pandy from Pandemic. And if it was a boy, it'd be Covito for COVID. So this is our new normal. Make sure you sign up for next week's program. Luis Garza and Oscar Castillo. It's going to be fantastic. It's from 6 to 8 next week. And just stay posted to RAM. There's a lot of good things coming. They're wonderful people. So to Drew, to Carrie, and to Valerie, thank you so much for hosting tonight's event. Thank you so much. Ahí nos guachamos. And don't forget the máscara. Buy the máscara to hide your máscara.